The first technique to maintain your balance in a kayak is to always keep your head centered over the kayak. It's really that simple. And that applies to when you're sitting flat or when the boat's up on edge. Because as soon as I let my head fall to one side, second technique for not losing your balance or your sunglasses is to stay loose in the hips and really allow your lower body and your upper body to work independently but cooperatively with each other. Now, starting paddlers who tend to be a bit more nervous, they tend to be all stiff. And so when they get hit by wave or wind, their whole body and head gets shifted to one side or the other off center. If you stay loose in the hips, when maybe you even drift into a rock, you hit that rock or that wave hits you, that's okay. Your head stays center over the kayak. Not only does loose hips really let your kayak go with the flow and absorb the different things that are going to happen to it while you keep your head centered, but it's a key technique to learn for more advanced paddling techniques, which can involve paddling with your kayak on edge. This is how you can deal with rough water, with current, and even control your boat in windy conditions. So not only is it a great technique to learn to maintain your balance, but it's a great technique to learn to help accelerate your paddling. Now, the next technique we're going to talk about involves recovering your balance. And to do that, you use braces. Now, brace simply involves, as soon as I lose my balance, my head falls to one side and I start tipping, I stop my flipping momentum by slapping the water with my paddle. Once I do that, that momentary support I get from the paddle allows me to roll the kayak upright again and then bring my body over top. Now, in order to do this, before we get into specifics, it's important to identify that this bracing technique really works much better when you're in a kayak that has hip support and thigh hooks. When you have a boat that's fit around you like this, you're wearing a pair of trail shoes, trail runners, whereas in wreck kayaks where you don't have thigh hooks, don't have hip support, you're almost in rubber boots, oversized rubber boots. You just don't have the same braces that you can use. There's a low brace and a high brace. And the big difference between the two is the position of your paddle relative to your elbows. A low brace, the paddle is lower than your elbows. For a high brace, the paddle is higher than your elbows. Now, whichever you use, this is how it works. If you start to flip, you reach out at 90 degrees and slap the water with your paddle. Now, the natural thing to do is to try to push your head and body back over top the kayak, but your paddle just is not going to provide enough support to do that, and so you're just going to keep flipping. What you have to do instead is you have to level off the boat first, and the only way to do that is by pulling up with the bottom knee, the knee that's going underwater. Once your boat is level, you can then swing your head and body back over top the kayak. This is where thigh hooks and hip pads come in really handy. To make sure your head drops towards the water, a good trick is to watch your brace, because it's hard to lift your head when you're looking down. Now, we could go into a lot more depth about the low brace and high brace and even the sculling brace, which I haven't shown you yet.
I'm edging my kayak, my center of gravity stays over my belly button, stays over the center of the kayak. So edging my kayak looks like this. My body sort of makes a C. I'm picking up with my knee. I'm thinking about dropping my other leg or dropping my hip down in the water. This is edging. So when we're talking about doing an edge turn, this is what we're looking at. Now, if we're talking about leaning our kayak, maybe for a bracing edge turn or something like that, that's actually leaning our whole body. And basically you can lean to a certain place, your body goes with the boat, but it's, at some point, if you don't brace or do something to support yourself in the water, you're gonna go over. So again, edging, nose stays centered, you can get that kayak way up on edge, leaning, goes to a certain point, and then the boat's gonna go over. So since we're here, let's go ahead and talk about bracing for our first thing. since we're in nice shallow water, and if we brace and go over, we're not actually going to flip our kayak over. A bracing stroke looks something like this. A low brace is when you're using the back face of your paddle to push against the water to support yourself. A high brace is when you're using the power face of your paddle, and it typically is more of an extreme lean to brace yourself. For today's video, we're mostly going to be talking about low brace positions, just because that's what most people are going to be doing the majority of the time. Really, the only time you're going to be using a high brace is if you are in, I don't know, a whitewater situation, or maybe you were bracing up for a roll. But for the most part, we're going to be low bracing. High braces tend to put your shoulders in a little bit more vulnerable positions. And for this video, we're going to stay away from that. So what does a low brace look like? Basically, a low brace looks like I'm putting the paddle out to the side and I'm going to push down on the water for that momentary support while I get my nose back over my center. So again, I'm going to lean over, push down on the water, and I actually think about dropping my head towards the paddle and sweeping it back over center. Again, I put my weight on the paddle, center myself back up. This is a really handy thing. Say a wave's coming by, you're not sure what to do, you can be in a bracing position, you can always just push off the water. And that's how I'd recommend starting, just by little baby backstrokes. Think about dropping your head towards the water. I'm using my knee here to pick the boat up as I brace. Watch, I go over, push down against the water. I'm picking up that knee, bringing my head towards the center. A lot of it's what our upper body's doing. The paddle blade's just having a moment of support while we get ourselves back over center. If our blade was flat, it's going to want to sink down in the water. It's going to provide no support. So we really want to think about having our elbows up, blade flat on the water, pushing down for support. I like to think about rolling my wrist forward as I brace, just because that helps the paddle climb through the water and provide even more support. So I'm pushing down and kind of sweeping it forward throughout the stroke. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the high brace just because it's a good transition into other things like draw strokes. So the high brace works just like the low brace, but you're using the power face of the blade to support yourself. So as the kayak goes over, reaching out, and I'm pulling the paddle back towards me. Again, low brace, high brace, pulling it back towards me. And the reason I like to talk about that stroke is because it actually puts you in the exact position you need to be in for doing things like a sculling draw. It gets you in the habit of rolling that paddle back in your hand without changing the hand position of your paddle. All right, so low brace, elbows up. High brace, elbows down. That way when you hear me talk about a low brace or a high brace position, you automatically know where your paddle needs to be. Okay, let's start with just some absolute basic stuff. Like I want my kayak to go that way. So we're gonna start with the draw stroke. There's two ways to do the draw stroke. You can take your paddle, reach out to the side here. Again, I'm rotating with my body because I want to face my work, and I'm going to pull that paddle back towards me. When I get close to the boat, I'm going to make a T and go back out. So I'm going to use that power face, pull the paddle towards me, make a T, slice it out. If you don't do that, if you just keep pulling, your paddle's going to hit your boat and you're going to feel like you're going to trip over. If you don't turn that paddle 90 degrees, you're going to push against that paddle and it's going to make you want to tip over. So it's really important as you're doing this stroke, pull towards you, turn your paddle 90 degrees, and then slice back away. And that's going to make you go sideways. So if you need to pull up and talk to a friend, you can use this draw stroke. The other way to move sideways is called a sculling draw. Same sort of a concept where you're using the power face of your blade, facing your work, but I'm sculling through the water. I like to think of this stroke like I'm spreading peanut butter, slicing the paddle forward through the water, slicing the paddle backwards, but I'm only engaging the power face of my paddle. I'm never engaging the back face. The power face is the only thing touching the water. Nice vertical stroke, facing my work, like spreading peanut butter on bread. The power face, water coming under the boat's not hitting that chine, it's sliding under the boat, allowing it to move sideways with a lot less effort. Let's try it here. All right, come on back. I personally like that sculling draw. It just feels really nice, and if you get in the rhythm, you can really make the boat go wherever you want. So basically, I like to think of my kayak as 4 quadrants, split down the center and along the side. If my paddle is directly along the side, I'm going to move sideways. If my paddle's up into the front, I'm going to move this front quadrant. If I'm drawing towards the back, it's going to move that back quadrant. So wherever my paddle is at in relationship to these quadrants is how it's going to move the boat, either towards the paddle or away from the paddle. So that same draw stroke we learned we can do in different positions along our boat. If we do the draw stroke like we've been doing right at our side, that's going to move us sideways, okay? If we do that same draw towards our bow, it's going to bring our bow towards the paddle. If we do that draw stroke towards our stern, it's going to bring the stern towards the paddle. What I want you guys to start thinking about as we progress here is that all this paddle blade is doing is holding on to a piece of water so you can then manipulate the boat. And you'll really feel that if you're on land doing this, if you're just sitting there with the paddle in your hand on carpet or on the grass, and you rotate and you put that paddle in the grass and then you pivot, what you'll notice is the paddle blade doesn't really move. Our lower body is becoming the boat, and our lower body is actually doing the majority of the work to drive and maneuver the kayak. So the first way I like to apply some of these skills is to do an inside edge turn. And what that means is we're going to be doing a low brace on the inside of our kayak, leaning towards the paddle and doing a little bit of an edge turn. This is a pretty standard thing most of us are doing. Most of us know to just like back sweep to stop. The only difference here is we're actually going to stay squared up to our paddle. We're going to lean on it for a little bit of support. We're going to use that back face at a nice climbing angle and just press away. What we're also thinking about doing is taking our knees and pulling them towards the paddle. As you do this, kind of like a pry together, what you'll notice is that your knee is actually pulling the boat towards the paddle. It's not so much your paddle pulling towards your knee. Does that make sense? Remember, the paddle's just trying to anchor. We're trying to think about what is our lower body doing to drive the kayak where we want to go. Let's try that one again. Okay, I'm paddling towards you. I'm gonna rotate, look where I want to go, push the paddle in the water, and then think about bringing that knee towards the paddle. As I slow down and stop, I'm gonna lose support on that paddle, so I need to bring myself back to center. But as I'm going, you find I can put a ton of pressure on that paddle. As long as I've got momentum going forward, that paddle's gonna be creating lift, just like an airplane wing, right? If I create lift, that water's gonna hit that paddle and wanna climb up out of the water. So that's where we're getting our support. So that's what we call an inside edge turn. Typically, you're gonna do an inside edge turn when you're trying to stop quickly, or maybe you need to make a move, or maybe you don't want to hit your friend, you can brace and turn away. But the only problem with the inside edge turn is it kills all your speed and your momentum. A lot of times we want to turn the boat, but we want to keep going somewhere. And that's where the outside edge turn comes into play. An outside edge turn looks like this. I'm going to be edging as opposed to leaning, right? So my center of gravity stays over my belly button. And I'm going to be doing a sweep stroke. Remember from the first video, our sweep strokes, we put it in here at the toe and we sweep our way all the way towards the stern, keeping our paddler's box intact. But now what I want you to think about in this video is really driving through that foot, okay? So again, the paddle's holding onto a piece of water, and I'm gonna take this left foot here, and I'm gonna think about driving the kayak away from the paddle. As I straighten my leg out and push the kayak away, there's gonna be a natural lean to the boat. You're leaning away from the turn. That's why it's called an outside edge turn. Same principle applies. You're not digging that keel and you're allowing the boat's keel to kind of slide across the surface of the water. Let's see if I can demonstrate here. Really driving that foot. And if you don't feel fully comfortable on the edge, check this out. You can actually follow up with that low brace. Yeah, so as you're learning and you're progressing, you can do your sweep stroke on your outside edge, roll your paddle forward and have a nice low brace for support. So now you're always being supported throughout the stroke. This is a great stroke when I'm trying to keep my speed up and I want to turn but keep my rhythm. I don't want to just paddle twice on the left side to get my boat to come around. No, I want to be able to edge, drive the boat through my hips and get going where I want to go. So I can keep paddling, keep my cadence up. Basically, I'm using my hips to help steer and drive the boat. Now let's say I want to turn my boat 360. These are long boats and they can take a little while to get turned if you don't know what you're doing. So I want you to look like a pro out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine those two strokes we just learned. The inside edge turn and the outside edge turn. If we do them in sync back to back, we should be able to turn this kayak in a 360 right in place. So we're going to go ahead and start with our reverse sweep stroke, winding up towards the stern, putting the paddle in the water, thinking about bringing my knees to the paddle, and then switch it up with a reverse sweep stroke, pushing the boat away from the paddle, reverse sweep, forward sweep. Again, using my edges to shorten the boat's water line, using my lower body to drive the boat, using my rotation to really anchor and catch the paddle blade. At the end of this, what I want you to start feeling is you no longer have hands. Your hands are the paddle blades. So when you think about reaching out and grabbing some water, this is your hand grabbing the water. You no longer have legs. You are a kayak. You've become a kayak. Your knees, your hips, your butt, your feet are all connected and talking to the boat so you can drive and steer it. And you're not just paddling, you're becoming a kayak. Okay, I hope I haven't lost you guys yet. We've covered a lot of ground, but I really want to get to this next skill because I think it's the most fun and enjoyable, and it's draw strokes and ruddering strokes. This is where you really get your paddle to be your flippers in the water, and you can get this boat to do whatever you want it to do. Let's just start with a ruddering stroke. I want you to kind of think about this concept of your paddle blade being the rudder of a ship. So if it's towards the stern of the boat, this is a ruddering stroke, okay? Think about that paddle going into the water, and if I push that paddle out, that's gonna make my boat turn to the left. If I pull it in, it's gonna draw the stern of my boat and make my boat go to the right. So you have a lot of control. You'll see those guys surfing, and you'll see them kind of like this in the water. That's so they can manipulate their boat left and right just by rotating their wrists. So what I'm gonna do now is just paddle right towards you, keep my paddle in the water, and I wanna play with that. I wanna show you as I open this up, the stern's gonna draw towards the paddle. As I push it away, the stern's gonna push away from the paddle. So super helpful skill if you find yourself surfing downwind. You can catch little rides. And you can really control that boat just by opening up the face. See how the stern's gonna draw towards the paddle? Closing the face, stern's gonna go away from the paddle. So if you're trying to get that boat to come back on track, you can put that paddle in there. And it's just like our low brace stroke, but a little bit more vertical. And you can really rotate it to get it to go left and right. So play with that one. It's really great if you have any downwind conditions that's blowing from the back, because that's when a kayak wants to do what we call weathercock, like the boat wants to go sideways. You can really control a lot of that weathercocking just by those ruddering strokes. Now if we move that same sort of stroke from our stern up to our bow, now we have what we call a bow rudder. This is one of the most challenging strokes for people to get because it is sort of an awkward position, but it works out really well. What I want you to think about is starting in your high brace position, and then we're gonna go to like our draw stroke. Remember when we were doing this and we were sculling? So take our draw stroke where our paddle is parallel with our keel, parallel with our kayak, and then we're just gonna move it forward and then open it up to the oncoming water just slightly. See how my wrists are rotated back? They're not rotated forward. That's gonna make our boat wanna stop or the paddle go underneath our bow. We want that paddle face to be opened up to the oncoming water. Coming in, I'm gonna go from here, rotate that paddle forward, lean into it. The more I rotate, the more the boat edges, the more powerful that stroke can become. This is a great stroke when you're just trying to keep your speed but redirect your course a little bit. I'm doing the same thing with my lower body, just like we were doing an outside edge turn. My right knee is picked up, my left knee or my left leg is pushing through the foot pedal, allowing that hold to slip across the water. Nice.